I want to talk about a general idea of volatility, and that is what is will characterize the future. Volatility. You're going to see changes, and those changes, some of them will be sudden, but they'll be against a background of constant change. And so you'll get this sense that things are gradually changing with sudden shifts. One of those features of the volatility will be people who are overcome by changes that they did not anticipate. Now, this will be particularly sad when those changes were completely predictable by anybody with half a brain because they are the next logical step in a process that's been evident for some time. But we already see this as an aspect of human nature that's somewhat coddled and artificially boosted by situations like ours where we are swimming in unmerited prosperity. And you see circumstances in which what would otherwise be terminal ideas are allowed to fester and infect a larger portion of the population. So you see individuals all the time who act as if they're surprised when they lose a job that they had every sign that they were going to lose, or at least knew that they did not measure up to, and so on and so forth. There are cases where people have a lackluster spouse, and then all of a sudden they're surprised when their lackluster spouse does something lackluster, and then the marriage is severely harmed by that, or whatever. But there are also sudden, unexpected changes, and those could also involve things like job loss and terminal damage to a marriage, or whatever the case may be, where you just weren't expecting it, and it came out of left field, and there was really no reasonable way you could have anticipated those changes. And those are sad in their own way, but the really sad ones are the ones that you see coming from a mile away. But it's very important as things become even more volatile that you get better at handling change. And so one way to handle or to get better at handling change is to see those things that are coming that are really obvious. And most of the time, the problem there has nothing to do with perception and everything to do with honesty. People are scared of change, and so they refuse to acknowledge it or the things that call for it, even when it's really obvious. And so it behooves everyone to live in reality and to pay attention to it, especially the things that you don't like. You have to pay attention to those things and make the changes that they suggest as early as you can in a rational prioritization across your limited resources. So, whether it's situations involving people, situations involving foundations upon which you stand, even things like the social environment, whether you can go to the drugstore without getting mugged, or government situations of, well, I've never been harassed by a sheriff, so I'm just going to assume that that's always going to be the case, or whatever the case may be. Or I can call 911 and the cops will protect me. Well, maybe the time will come when that doesn't happen, as it has for many people in the United States now. Even things like weather and natural disasters. You might think I live in a place that never has tornadoes. Well, guess what? Volatility is coming for you too. So these are things to think about and to prepare for. And because you can't really have a good idea of what's coming, sometimes the best thing to do is to stop making bets based on the assumption of things staying the same. In other words, you can make bets. Let me rephrase that. Stop making bets based on your ability to predict the direction in which things will go, and start making bets based on your inability to predict the way things are going to go. And I will give you an example of this in literal terms that is not a suggestion for you to make investments, let alone to make them this way, but rather a very specific and understandable example of a principle that I do think everyone should live in life as time goes by. So most people bet on stocks based on what they presume are the merits of the company. So you'll look at a company, you'll say, I think this is a good company, I think it's going to grow. They make good products, they have good leadership, whatever. And so you buy that stock, assuming things will keep going in that direction. Or maybe it's a company that's not so great, and then some change just happened that you expect them to do better in the future. Those are bets on a specific direction. The direction could be down. You could say it's never going to get better for this company, and so I'm going to short it because I assume it's going to get worse in the future. Those are all bets on a specific direction. When you bet based on volatility, you're just betting that things will be different than what they are now. And the interesting thing about this is you'd say, well, how is that different? If it's going up, isn't that the same as a bet that it's going to go down in the future? No, because you win in that sort of bet when that happens. But when you bet based on volatility, you're accepting the fact that you don't know when it will change. So you don't really know the direction or the time. You're latching up to something that you're expecting to do this on the price chart. And as long as it's doing this, you'll make money as long as you can wait long enough, and as long as it doesn't do this or this, right? Hopefully that makes sense. So it turns out you can make a ton of money just betting on volatility. The problem is, and this is why this is not investment advice, we live in a system where random things are going to collapse to varying degrees at random times. I should say seemingly random with all of that, but the trend is going to be down. And so you can make tons of money based on volatility, but if things get artificially inflated up and just stay there forever, your money's going to be locked into that. If they go down and never come back, you've just lost that money if you ended up betting the other way. So hopefully that makes sense. But in life, you can also bet on volatility. Now, what does that mean? Usually it means being more conservative than you would otherwise be, spending less money than you think you can get away with, doing more to be more robust for the future than you think you need to. So the theme here is that you're going to see this play out a million times in a million different ways. What used to work is not going to work anymore. What used to be okay is not going to be good enough anymore. You're going to see new problems in the failure of existing solutions. Examples: a normal job isn't going to be enough. You're going to see people who are doing what people have always done, and it's just not enough to have what people always had before. And this is going to create even more volatility, because a whole lot of people are going to say it's not worth it to do what people used to do to get less than people used to get out of it. And in a way, they're right. You're going to see normal approaches to family not being enough. Again, as it is with almost everything we talk about in this playlist of future warnings on this theme, you see this already playing out, but with all of these examples, not just the family one. Normal marriages aren't good enough anymore. They don't hold together, and they don't produce happiness. Normal ways of raising children are not good enough anymore. Those kids are disastrous. The world would be better without them, which is really sad. So normal families, they're not good enough anymore. Normal approaches to housing aren't enough anymore. Most people cannot afford a home anymore. If you're not already in one, the odds of you being able to get in one are very low. And what we're seeing increasingly, and you should prepare for this one, is normal approaches to food will not be enough. And if you go grocery shopping, you might already be at the point where they're not enough. Because when everything costs double digits, you have to start eating less. If not in quantity, certainly in quality, but the time will come when you are constrained in the number of calories you eat by how much money you make and or what you grow at home. And we're seeing that increasingly be the case. And so the message here is that you ought to expect much greater volatility across many things that used to be considered unchanging and reliable, whether this is finance, businesses, like your ability to go buy stuff at different stores, whatever, housing, travel, you name it. So you can brainstorm a bunch of questions here that this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but how would your life change if you could never get on an airplane again? How would your life change if you couldn't call a plumber if and when you have a plumbing problem in your house? How would your life change if you couldn't buy the parts to fix a plumbing problem in your house? How would your life change if you suddenly couldn't afford the house you're living in? How would your life change if all of a sudden you were capped in the number of miles you could drive per day? How would your life change if your food costs quadrupled from where they are right now? How would your life, we could just keep doing this all day long, right? How would your life change if your husband or wife suddenly left you? How would your life change if your child made a choice that vastly changed your life? That sounds not so useful because it's so general, but there's so many ways that that could happen that to pick one seems a little silly. And on and on and on and on and on. The forecast in all things is volatility. And the more you wrap your head around that, here's what's going to happen. The more obvious the options that are in front of you right now become, because they're invisible, most of them are invisible to most of you. And the more worthwhile what seem like great sacrifices right now to put yourself in a better position for those times will be. That's a really big part of all of these videos on this theme. If you understand what's coming and you believe it, which hopefully comes through rational analysis more than anything else, because the writing's on the wall with all of these things, the more willing you will be to pay what would otherwise be an unreasonable price for things to come. So let me give you an example, and just to underscore what I hope is a recurring theme that I don't need to say again, but I will say it again anyway, because for some of you, you need to hear it again. The value of any of these things is very minimal until and unless you change your life so that you're living in accordance with what you sincerely believe God would do in your place. There's no path through everything that's coming where you will have joy in any other approach. So that's very important to put first and foremost, and hopefully it doesn't need to be said because it's so obvious, but I say it anyway. So that being said, there are already options out there for a lot of people where it's really obvious that, for example, being able to grow more of your food that you eat on your own property with minimal reliance upon other people, which rules out being on public utilities, for example. As you're actually independent, more independent than you are now in the basics of life, You will be better off in the future. And people look at that and they say, but it's such a high cost to get there. Yes, it is. And understandably, for many people, it's completely out of the realm of possibilities under the constraints that you currently understand. It's not actually outside the realm of possibilities. It's just outside the realm of possibilities you're willing to consider. That's different. It's the same as a young lady complaining that there's no one to marry. There's no such thing as female incels, involuntary celibates. There's no such thing. There is a guy somewhere who would love to be with you. It's just that you don't like him. So understand that. And it's like that for people who say, there's no path for me to be able to grow my own food. No, there's no path with all of the imagined independence that you currently enjoy, which is going away. And when it does, it's going to produce an amortized pain for you. The bill is going to come due. And when you pay the piper, it will be much more pain than it would be to take a path that does not preserve that imagined independence. So there's that. But I get it. I get that in the space of options you're willing to consider, many people don't have this option. But I address those who do. I address those who do. Same deal with homeschooling. When we talk on and on about homeschooling, I understand that there are women out there who chose men who cannot support them if they choose to homeschool their children. They don't have that option financially. And there's not really a whole ton they can do about that. So they have to focus their efforts on mitigating the cost of public school in the time they have to do so after work hours, which really stinks. And so hopefully a large chunk of what you're doing about it is making sure that every young person you know, every young woman you know, is not going to make the mistake you did. But I address the women who have the choice and don't make it, right? What about those folks? So in that vein, there are many people who could move to a place where you have the ability to grow more of your food. And it will cost you a lot more than it would have if you had listened to me when I told you this for the last 10 years. But it's still worth the cost. And it will continue to be until you can't do it anymore. Not just because you choose not to, but because there are physical barriers in place that prevent you from doing so. So, one point of all of this is to provide greater persuasion for you to see the cost benefit more accurately now, while there's still something you can do about it. Of course, another big piece of why I'm doing all these videos is so that as you see everything I'm telling you happen, and you honestly remember that when I told you it would happen, depending on what the message was, there were few to none who said these things, few to none who believed them. And so then the honest thing to do will be to believe other things that I've said that maybe don't have as easy ways of validating them here and now. And that's not some weird mesmerizing trick on my part. If you study it out in the scriptures, you'll see this has always been a chief function of prophecy, to attest to the truthfulness of the other things that that person has taught. So expect volatility and make the changes that that suggests in your life. First and foremost being reconciling your life completely to what you sincerely believe the Lord would do in your place at all times and in all places. And then, if this happens to be a piece of that, to make changes in your life to better prepare for the things that you expect to happen.